Hello, and welcome to a 10-minute presentation entitled Rational Thought, the third installment of a series entitled Science versus Religion. Previously, I described how the pre-Socratic Greek philosophers searched for deeper truth than was offered by the poetic mythology of their surrounding culture. To make sense of an ever-changing world, they developed the important idea of logos, but this meant subtly different things to different philosophers. Plan, formula, relationship, thought, and reason were just some of the different interpretations that they developed. These early philosophers are often described as laying the foundations for the systems of rational human thought that have carried forwards into our society. Indeed, today's schools and colleges reveal this legacy in the very names of academic subjects that contain logos: biology, physiology, psychology, theology, even logic itself. But there are many components of pre-Socratic philosophy that we no longer consider rational. Indeed, some systems of thought, such as astrology, have been so completely redeveloped as to be no longer taught as part of a rational education. So what exactly was it within the thinking of the pre-Socratics that defined rational thought? For an answer, I turn to an essay entitled The Beginnings of Rationalism, written by one of the 20th century's greatest philosophers of science, Karl Popper. Popper focused on the Ionian school, a diverse group of pre-Socratic thinkers who lived more than 2,500 years ago in a region that would be found in modern Turkey. In particular, Popper highlighted a man named Thales who came from the Ionian town of Miletus. In contrast to the mythological, supernatural explanations of his surrounding culture, Thales used abstract reason to deduce natural explanations for the world. For example, he lived in a region that experienced many earthquakes. Unsatisfied with the explanation that these were caused by the gods, Thales proposed that perhaps the earth floated upon water, such that waves beneath the land could produce the tremors that humans perceived. But Popper was less interested in the content of Thales' ideas than in the way he taught them. In particular, Popper draws attention to Anaximander, apparently one of Thales' pupils, who criticized Thales' explanation by pointing out that it merely raised a new question. If the earth floats upon water, then what does this water itself float on? Again, Popper's interest lies not in Anaximander's equally strange answers, but in the fact that he questioned his teacher and then developed his own ideas. Specifically, Popper is intrigued by the observation that Thales seems to have encouraged this critical departure. Thus, Popper writes, Thales founded a new relation between master and pupil, and goes on to say, I like to think that Thales was the first teacher who said to his pupils, this is how I see things, how I believe that things are. Now try to improve upon my teaching. Popper's point is that by encouraging criticism, Thales founded an exciting intellectual tradition on the realization that our attempts to see and find truth are not final, but open to improvement, that our knowledge consists of guesses rather than of final and certain truths. Criticism and discussion are our only means of getting nearer to the truth, and this, for Popper, is the origin of rational thought. Popper thus draws a sharp distinction between Thales' positive view of critical discussion and the practices of other early philosophers, such as Pythagoras. As mentioned previously, Pythagoras was a pre-Socratic who judged that truth was to be found in mathematics. Having travelled around Persia, Egypt and India, absorbing ideas from cultures where religion, magic and mathematics mixed freely, he went on to found a school whose members were taught that the study of numbers could bring a deeper understanding of God. And Popper writes that, while the discoverers of the Pythagoreans might be classified as scientific by us, to those who made them they were revelations, and their school was a religious brotherhood, united by initiations into mysteries. Indeed, Pythagoreans even prayed directly to the number 10. But for Popper, the point was not that the Pythagoreans held religious beliefs about numbers, rather it was that they prohibited open critical discussion. Truths were slowly revealed, like riddles from teacher to pupil. As an aside, Popper then questions which idea of school we follow most closely in the modern world. He notes that, far from being places of critical discussion, modern schools make it their task to impart a definite doctrine, pure and unchanged. All of which brings us back to a question that I raised previously. The pre-Socratic philosopher Xenophanes challenged that we may project ourselves to form ideas about God. Today I'd ask you to think about the extent to which your beliefs concerning God have been shaped by rational inquiry, and here I mean rational in Popper's sense. Has your belief, or lack of belief, in God developed through open critical discussion with others, from the starting assumption that a full truth is beyond your current understanding? To help with this question, the rest of today takes a brief look at the most famous three philosophers of ancient Greece, Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle. In part, this is because they exerted such influence over the development of both science and religion, largely because we know so much more of their work than about that of the pre-Socratics, for whom we have literally just fragments of writing. But equally important to us is that they represent superb examples of Popper's point. Each developed a very different philosophy about truth and about God, yet Plato was Socrates' pupil, and Aristotle was Plato's pupil. So how did rational thinking develop under them? Socrates began by redefining philosophy, pushing aside all thinking about the natural world in order to focus on what it means to know, founding a line of inquiry that is known in modern philosophy as epistemology. His start point was that opinions, what I think is correct, are very different from knowledge, what I know to be true. The question is whether and how we can turn one into the other. And his conclusion was that philosophy should focus on finding the right questions rather than finding the right answers. This process of searching through reason was Socrates' logos. His emphasis thus matches Popper's view exactly, that to be genuinely rational we must see our attempts to find truth as a series of steadily improving guesses, each modified through criticism and discussion. But it was an approach that led Socrates into trouble with the authorities. Eventually he was charged with believing in gods of his own invention rather than in the religion endorsed by the state, and with corrupting the youth of Athens with his ideas and questions. Sentenced to death by drinking hemlock poison, he continued teaching to the very end as his followers gathered around him. Meanwhile, Socrates' pupil Plato built upon his teacher's focus on reasoning towards truth, but extended this back into asking questions about the physical world, bringing in the pre-Socratic view that if our senses reveal a world of constant change, then eternal truth is not going to be found by focusing on what we perceive of reality. The result was his philosophy that ideas are more real, and therefore more true, than the physical objects to which they correspond. To follow his line of reasoning, consider that we know a dog when we see one, even if we have never seen this particular dog before. To Plato, this demonstrated the existence of some unseen, unchanging idea of a perfect dog that we somehow already possess, since it is only by reference to this idea dog that we recognize any real, imperfect instance of dog. The idea is the more real of the two. To take another example, I can be confident that you have never seen a truly perfect circle anywhere outside of your mind, so this shape has its truest existence as an idea. And to Plato, all of this implied that our sensory perceptions of the physical world merely confuse our power to reason about truths that are already inside us. As he learned all this from Plato, Aristotle then continued the tradition of critical departure. He retained the focus on the physical world and on reason as a key to knowledge, but argued that the primary step in knowing anything is by perceiving the physical world through our senses. The truth is out there, but our perceptions of it are improved by the application of reason. This focus on observing and then analyzing the physical world has led many to describe Aristotle as the originator of Western science. But a more direct byproduct of his thinking was that so many areas of academic thought within our culture contain the word ology. Specifically, Aristotle described three ways in which one person may persuade another of any given truth: pathos, ethos, and logos. Ethos referred to the credibility of the persuader. Pathos referred to the creation of an emotional conviction of truth within the listener. And logos, which Aristotle viewed as the best of the three, is usually described as an appeal to reason. Thus, Aristotle's idea that the best way to share truth is through reasoned arguments has encouraged the close association between logos and formal education. For example, biology is the study of truth about living organisms through rational discussion. Viewed in this way, the Greek philosophers began carving out rational thought from the rest of our human experience. And to some this process continues today, as each of us gradually frees ourselves from irrational beliefs in the supernatural through reason and science. But it would be very misleading to think that the philosophers saw themselves as attacking or dismantling the idea of God. Indeed, while Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle each produced a very different and original view of reality, all travelled a path that led in their minds to a deeper understanding of God than was held by the society around them. For example, Socrates expressed the strong belief that God had given him the mission to bring to the people of Athens his philosophy of searching through reason, logos. He simply questioned the confident religious truths being handed down around him, and it was this questioning that led others to describe him as an atheist. Likewise, Plato saw the world of truth ideas organized into levels. Beyond the idea of a perfect vase or a perfect dog were more general and thus more important ideas, such as truth and perfection, and God was the greatest and most real idea of all. Indeed, he invented the term theology to mean the application of logos to understanding God, a superior understanding to the mythos of his culture. Aristotle's philosophy was that within the physical world, our reason perceives the purpose in things, and this logos connection is what makes sense of the world to us. Since purpose implies design, a purposeful world implied some sort of cosmic designer. Thus, alongside some fairly traditional religious beliefs in the Greek gods of Mount Olympus, Aristotle's philosophy led him to the idea of a God who was necessary to fill the whole changing physical world with meaning, and the rational study of God, theology, was the greatest application of logos. All of which brings us to the question that I ask you to write about before the next presentation. Sir Francis Bacon, who we'll meet again later in the course, once suggested that a little philosophy inclineth man's mind toward atheism, but depth in philosophy bringeth men's mind about to religion. So when you look back over your own life, do you find that reason has moved you towards or away from a belief in God? You may find it helpful to reflect upon Popper's attempt to define reason and Aristotle's distinction between pathos, ethos and logos. Once again, I challenge you to summarize your answer into 250 words or less.